You're listening to Sustainably Geeky, the podcast for everyday environmentalists.
Hi, you're listening to Sustainably Geeky, episode 48. I am here today with Garik Himebaugh. He is the founder of Eco-Stylist, and we're going to be revisiting a topic we talked about actually exactly 2 years ago last month, which is fast fashion. I figure this is a topic that never really goes out of style, pun intended, and it's something that's worth repeat conversation. So Garik's here to kind of share his insight and Garik, thank you for being on the show. Can you start by just telling us a little bit about yourself and what sustainability means to you?
Yeah, hey Jennifer, thanks so much for having me. Yeah, so I'm Garik, the founder of Eco-Stylist, as you mentioned. I started Eco-Stylist 3.5+ years ago. So I've been doing this, ever since then. And prior to that, I worked in some different areas trying to figure out, kind of what it was that I wanted to do in my career. And I was in business school actually when I kind of started the inkling of what became Eco-Stylist. And so Eco-Stylist is a resource for ethical fashion. And so we help people, make better choices in their closet, basically. Like if they want to stop shopping fast fashion and they want, to find alternatives to fast fashion brands and things like that. We research brands, the primary thing we do. And so we have a directory of, vetted sustainable brands that people can shop instead that are better for people in the environment. And so, basically, and then we have like a blog and everything. So basically we're just trying to help people make better choices, more sustainable choices in their closets.
Yeah, that's a great mission. Can you kind of explain to our listeners what the difference is between fast fashion and sustainable fashion? Because I know fast fashion is a term that's getting used a lot more these days, but a lot of people may not be familiar with it.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of like you mentioned, unfortunately, fast fashion is kind of always on trend. So if we look at the update of like where fast fashion is, a couple years later, it's not where I would like it to be, right? Like I would have liked to have seen it been more on the decline. But it's actually not true. In 2022, fast fashion is actually still growing as a segment. And that's because we've seen the new evolution we've seen in fast fashion is like what people are calling ultra fast fashion, which is like Shein. And that's like, so for people who aren't familiar, fast fashion is a business model that was pioneered by Zara that basically took like what used to be the fashion industry business norm, which was like having 2 seasons a year, right, for a fashion brand. And they brought out this like fast model where they could drop collections a lot more frequently. And what that eventually meant was about once a week, these brands were dropping new collections of clothes, which as you can imagine, like that's the environmental impact of that increased production is significant. I was looking at a report recently that was estimating the impact of like a fast fashion piece versus a non-fast fashion piece is like 4 times because it's made cheaply and then it doesn't last as long and it's not being kept as long and it's sitting up right. And so when you look at like the greenhouse gas emission of it, it's like about 4 times as much. So it's actually just like really bad for our planet. And then these ultra fast fashion brands, which is like the new thing that's growing, like Shein is a Chinese based brand that drops like they add like 6,000 styles to their website a day. It's a level. It's like what Zara and H&M were doing. They were like, oh, we can do that better. But it's not, better for who, right? Is the question that we should be asking. And and then sustainable fashion is really what I consider to be a movement against that, really. But basically, sustainable fashion is, a host of choices that you can make as an individual to have a more sustainable closet, right? So that's everything from like wearing what we have, right? Which is like, because obviously that's, there's such this pressure on us to buy new things and we don't really need to do that. So like for like wearing what we have, like outfit repeating, which can be radical, in this age when people won't be seen twice on Instagram with the same outfit. So like outfit repeating and being proud of that, repairing what you have. And then there's like a host of more sustainable choices. So so like part of the buying journey being when you're buying new, it's like, can you support a more ethical and sustainable brand? Can you buy used, right? Can you thrift? Can you swap? And then there's also activism too. It's like, do you want like, it's kind of like there's a host of choices people can make depending on their interests, right? Like they could help Remake or Fashion Revolution with like petitions and stuff. And so, so really it's just like a host of choices that are better than fast fashion.
Yeah, fast fashion is really, like you said, kind of a relatively new phenomena, I think. But it just feels like the norm. Always seeing something new in the store. But it really is kind of a symptom of this capitalist push for constant growth and more, right? And planned obsolescence. It's a great example of planned obsolescence because they're designed to wear out quickly, the clothes, or they're designed to go out of fashion and you want something new. So it's really interesting how quickly it's taken off and how pervasive it is, despite the fact that we kind of know the environmental and social and ethical problems associated with it.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think the appeal is obvious, right? It's like I don't, and it's like I should say this too, because I think this is the case for most people who are in sustainable fashion. It's like most of us have shopped fast fashion at some point in our lives, right? So it's not like something that people are excluded from. Like I made that mistake when I first got interested in fashion. That was like the logical thing to do is like go to H&M and buy clothes because it seemed I didn't know any better then and it's like the appeal is obvious because they're what they claim they're doing, right? And this is like what all the CEOs of like every fast fashion house claim is that they're democratizing fashion. They're making like these trends and styles cheaper for the everyday person is what they say, and it is really cheap price wise, right? But what we don't see like behind the scenes, like what so that's really appealing, right? Like it's like, oh yeah, I want that. But then when you look behind the scenes, it's like, what are they actually doing, right? They're actually making the whole fashion industry like way less sustainable. They're not paying their clothing makers fairly. So like it's cheap for who is the big question. Like you get a $10 shirt, but how much did the clothing maker who made that make? Um, and then also when you look at these companies, they're making the people at the top like ultra rich. So I think if people knew that, maybe it might help see them a little bit differently. Like if you look at like who's in charge of Zara, H&M, Shein, like these are like multimillionaire, often billionaires, at the heads of these companies. So it's like not only are they, extremely extractive, like exploiting our planet and people, but they're really just like machines to make the people at the top ultra rich.
Yeah. I, myself am guilty of, like you said, the fast fashion trap. When I was a lot younger, I loved Ross and TJ Maxx and Marshalls and stores like that. But I thought I had discovered like, this holy grail that nobody knew about, discount clothes. Oh my God, like they're so cheap and there's so much of it and it's so cute. But then I started to realize, fast fashion is bad and this is part of it. And it's today, my go-to is thrift shops and, like you said, reusing or repairing if I can. But yeah, it's so easy to just not even think about where your clothes come from and just look at the price tag and think, oh, this is really inexpensive. And um, it is cheap for a reason, though. I mean, half the stuff I got from there would tear or wear out, or I just lost interest in it and I just donate it. And then, of course, that's a whole other problem. I'm sure you can talk about, clothing in thrift shops and things like that. But yeah, if people out there have participated in fast fashion or currently doing it and new to the idea of slow fashion or sustainable fashion, don't feel bad because that's kind of what our society has set us up for. But now that you know better, you can kind of start to do better, I guess.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And I think the number one thing that we kind of all can do as individuals is in that space is just to slow down, right? Like that's because I think that this rate of consumption is like that's the biggest problem is the buy and that's created like a series of problems, right? Like it's created problems of from like the clothes basically ending up in the trash, overburdening the resources for used clothes, right? Like Goodwill and these places like it used to be you would think that was a good thing to do is like take your used clothes to Goodwill, but it's not a bad thing to do, but they're so overburdened, right? Like they get so many clothes, they can only sell like 10 to 15% of them in store, and the rest are going overseas. And so at the end of the day, like many of them are still ending up in the trash. And so it's just like yeah, the systems are overburdened, and so like slowing down is the number one thing. And if we do that, it allows us to then look at all the other pieces too, like something really that you hear a lot with sustainable fashion is people will, when they're comparing a piece to like a fast fashion piece, the most immediate and most common resistance is like they'll say like it's expensive, it's more expensive than the fast fashion piece, right? But if we're changing our habits and as a society we're slowing down, then that becomes less true and even not true, right? So, but it has to come with that slowing down, right? Because it's like if you're spending more per piece, but you're buying less often, you're buying higher
Exactly.
quality stuff with like lifetime warranties. Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, you want to? Yeah,
Yeah, I was just agreeing because, I'm thinking of like a nice coat or a nice pair of shoes, if you sink a lot more money into that, but it's going to last you years and years, maybe your whole life. Um, that's a lot more affordable over the lifetime of that product than buying a new coat every, year or less, every 6 months or whatever, because it wears out and it breaks down.
exactly. Yeah, no, exactly. And there's so many examples. That I could think of. I mean, Patagonia is like one that people know, but there's other brands, that we've certified that have similar business models. But that would be a good one to think about where it's like, you buy something from them, right? And they put a lifetime guarantee on it. And so let's say you have a jacket from them for like 10 years and then maybe you want to like send it back to them to be because like they have worn wear, right? So maybe at the end of its life you don't want it anymore, and you let them repair it and resell it, right? Through their so like and that keeps it in the cycle. So like I think if you look at like a brand like that and the way a piece can last that long and have a journey like that, that's really really different
Yeah.
than what like H&M is doing.
Well, and they're even encouraging people not to buy their things, right? They put an ad out one year that said in Black Friday that said, "Don't buy this jacket because you probably don't need it. Only buy it if you need it." So it's interesting when brands are recognizing that, like, yeah, we have great products, and if you need them, you should buy them, but don't buy it just because we're trying to make money or whatever. Um, so okay, yeah. So you mentioned H&M, and my next question has to do with greenwashing. And H&M is one of those brands that advertises, "Bring us your old clothes. We'll recycle them, upcycle them, whatever." And in my mind, I'm thinking this is greenwashing. But can you kind of one, tell me if I'm wrong, and two, tell me or tell our listeners what is greenwashing for those who may have heard the term and kind of wondering how they can identify it for themselves.
Yeah, no, so it's definitely greenwashing. H&M is it's really interesting because there was this report that came out that found you know, like 60% of these fast fashion brands that make sustainability claims are greenwashing, like it's misleading or false claims. But in the case of H&M in particular, it was like 94 or 96% of their, so it was like especially bad. And so they're like one of the worst offenders of greenwashing. And so yeah, so what greenwashing is when a brand exaggerates their sustainability efforts, with the purpose of selling you more product, right? So there's a sell motive behind it. And so yeah, and so H&M has done this. We actually have a new article coming out, about them, but it's not like we haven't spoken about it before. We have like a YouTube video on H&M. We have another article on one of their previous collections, but they have like a long history of greenwashing. So there's like so many examples you could look at. But the clothing recycling one is really interesting actually because part of H&M's strategy and the way that they execute their greenwashing, and this is actually true this is something that I dug into recently that I thought was really interesting, is part of the reason fast fashion is growing in 2022 is actually it's actually because it's hold on like our current systems of social media. So by leveraging influencers, that's part of the reason that fast fashion is still growing, and it's because they're so in that. Like you look at like the top fashion influencers in for like men or women, right? Different, and you'll see like them tagging like Zara, H&M, Shein, etc. And they're being paid good money for these collaborations. And this is part of the way that these brands are still building our trust, basically, right? Because like it's pretty well known now that fast fashion isn't sustainable. Like I think a lot of people know that, but there people who they trust are still representing it. So influencers are honestly like one of the ways that fast fashion there is one of the reasons that it's still big today. And so basically, but yeah, so basically with the H&M's back to H&M's recycling program though. So that's part of the way they've made this successful is by partnering, with like Macy Williams, for example, and having her promote their recycling program for them. And that's this is something that they love to do is like partner with celebrities and influencers, and it really gives them like a better. They look better, but at the end of the day, it's like their whole loop machine thing. It's like there's so many questions with that, right? First of all, it's like how, like it's like what is the rate of recycling that machine is able to do? How many of them are there, right? Like where because they make it like it's like this world changing thing that like these clothes are going to be upcycled, and they did this as soon as they had like their first machine. But what they weren't telling you is like this isn't something they're doing mass scale yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And also it takes a while, like for that machine to recycle one garment. It's not like a quick process like it suggests. And so, but like there's like layers of problems with that. So let's just dig into. So like first of all, the biggest problem with H&M is that they have no intention of slowing down. So H&M, like there's articles that confirm this where they like by 2030 they want to double their sales. You got to think about that. Like H&M is one of the biggest fast fashion brands. They sell like I don't remember how many. It's over a billion pieces a year. I'm pretty sure. I'm trying to think of like the current number, but and they want to double that. So they don't like rather than like thinking of like let's slow down, let's be more sustainable. They want to double that by 2030, which is insane. And then they're also claiming at the same time that they're going to like be more sustainable. So their goals are completely contradictory. And the loop machine is, and honestly, this people need to be cautious of is the loop machine and the recycling program are how they justify all of this, right? Like that's really what those are. Is those are greenwashing mechanisms that make you still feel good about shopping at H&M and suggest that they're not wasting. But nothing could be further from the truth, right? Because like the thing is, like with the loop machine and stuff, it you get this picture of circularity in your head, but in reality, all their clothes are not being recycled. It's like a fraction, like it's not even close. And that's the danger of the loop machine is that it suggests that like it suggests this closed loop process at H&M that doesn't actually exist. And at the end of the day, like more than half of fast fashion ends up in the trash in less than a year. So it's like so basically they're still just generating tons of waste and trying to justify it with their like quote unquote sustainability programs.
And really, I mean, H&M is one example. I mean, or the fashion industry, I guess you could say, is one example of how recycling is often used to excuse or even encourage further consumption. Right? I mean, people think, oh well, if I recycle it, whether it's the clothes that I wear or the plastic straw that I use or whatever object is that I'm consuming, then I'm okay. But really, the solution is to consume less. I mean, reduce, reuse, recycle. Recycle is the third one. You should really be doing the first two first. And I think a lot of times people get so fixated on the recycle because it's the easiest one and they can still keep living their lives the same. But they need to start, like you said, thinking about, okay, is this actually getting recycled, or is it just kind of justifying me, continuing this out of control spiral of consumption?
No, actually, that's actually a great example. I love that you brought that up. Have you talked about like plastic recycling before on your podcast?
Yeah, we have, but
Okay.
feel free to.
Well, no, I was just gonna. I don't need to retalk. I was just gonna say that honestly, that's a great kind of analogy for H&M. Like that's basically what they are, right? They're the plastic recycling where they've scammed us into believing that it's sustainable and that if you put it in the recycling bin, like it has a sustainable life and it's gonna get recycled. When like that's not true with plastic, right? Like it's all a big scam essentially. And so like, and that's basically what H&M is. And so in reality, like we don't need to recycle H&M. We need to stop buying H&M. And that's like, so it's a really like, it's very similar to plastic, honestly.
Yeah. Actually, our 2 episodes ago was all about plastic. So if people want to learn more about that, feel free to listen. But yeah, I think the analogy is the same, whether it's like you said, plastic or clothes. The key is going to be really just using less, not finding ways to quote unquote recycle. I mean, electronics recycling is another huge issue we could go into, but we'll move on while we're talking about fashion. So we've talked a lot about greenwashing and companies that aren't doing things right, but what makes a brand sustainable? What are things that consumers can look for and know that they're actually supporting a company, that is doing good things and trying to make the world better and not, double their sales in 8 years?
Yeah, no, definitely, definitely. So our criteria for research when we look at brands is really into three pillars. So, and it's really specific to fashion. So we look for like transparency, fair labor, and sustainably made. And so it kind of encompasses like people and the planet, and it's really in depth. So our brand ratings on our website are really just a snapshot. It's like a summary because we don't want to burden our users with like all the information. But basically what we're looking for there, and the reason it's specific to fashion is, fashion has a history of exploitation. So that's why transparency is a key pillar. Is we have to ask brands to do better about sharing like how and where their clothes are made. And then because when that happens, the whole industry moves away from what was happening in the past, which was where people had no idea where their clothes were being made, and so many people were being exploited in the process, and and then the rivers like where the clothes are being made were just being poisoned. And so so that's why transparency is like this key pillar. And then we look for sustainably made as well, which is like honestly, it's like it's everything you could kind of imagine that a brand could be doing, right? So everything from like CO2, water waste, like do they measure, do they have plans and goals for reducing those things, to like do they have circularity programs, are more than half their fabric sustainable, all this stuff. And then and then as you can imagine in maker well-being, it's like wages are the biggest piece of that puzzle, because that's where garment workers have been getting the shortest end of the stick, is just not being paid fairly for their work. And so estimates were like 2% of clothing makers make a livable wage. And I think that's higher now but I would say it's 5% max. It's somewhere between there, right? The 2% measure is just a couple years old, but still, like most companies, there's no fast fashion company that pays livable wages, like doesn't exist. Um, and so yeah, so these are kind of things that we look for. And so I would say it's pretty complicated in fashion. So I would say like for users, I would really recommend finding a source that you trust. So like, like it could like such as Eco-Stylist, but it doesn't have to be, right? Like, but something like that where, they're doing the research and you can just like use their directory, like, vetted brands. That's obviously going to be the easiest way. If you want to look for things yourself, it is hard because it's pretty complicated and unfortunately, there's not like just one thing you can find. Like for example, if a brand is a B Corp, it means they're a social enterprise. But we've passed and failed B Corps through our research, so it's like I wouldn't say that's like the end all be all, or that's for fashion that like if but it's better than if you're just looking for one thing. Like it could be a starting point, I would say. Other things would be like fair trade, right? If you see that a brand is fair trade certified, that's a good signal. We have a lot of the brands we work with use fair trade certified factories. Like Patagonia does, like Known Supply, etc. And then other than that, there's tons of environmental certifications you can look for that help to ensure like things like the fabrics were made more sustainably, like GOTS being a big one for like I think one misconception about GOTS is like it's I think maybe people assume it verifies just that the cotton is organic, but that's not. It actually does a lot more than that. And so it's like if it's like GOTS certified organic cotton, it also means that the cotton was sourced sustainably, essentially. And so yeah, so those are kind of some things you can look for, if you want to kind of do your own research.
Okay. Yeah, it can be so overwhelming as a consumer, and not just in fashion, but in every aspect of your life to try to figure out. So having companies like yours or individuals who take the time to do the research or kind of dig into and translate some of what you're looking at, because it can get a lot of times I think they intentionally complicate things so that you don't know what you're looking at, and then you just give up and say, oh well, I guess they're fine, they have this or whatever. But yeah, I think that's very helpful for folks. And then obviously, you can always buy used, as we've said, and kind of avoid all that and know that what you're getting has already been in the system and you're not contributing anything new, at least. So okay, so we kind of talked about how individuals can make conscious choices when it comes to fashion. So something else that we had talked about was your thoughts on fast fashion eco collections.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's a great question as well. It's it's interesting because like so my general thought is this, and it's like I know it's an interesting question because if we think about like perfectionism, right, and we think of like trying to make a step that's incrementally better, and not necessarily perfect. I think that's where eco collections can get a lot of people, in terms of like it feels like that, like right, maybe it feels like an imperfect step, but and maybe it could be to some people, but I would argue that it's not, because like the main reason we don't even like look at eco collections is because it's a fraction of what a brand does, and it's never the majority of what they do, right?
Sorry, can you break down real quick what is an eco collection? Is it kind of like a line that says, oh, this is all made of water bottles or something like that? Is that?
Yeah, no, so of course, yeah. So an eco collection is like when a brand that's not focused on sustainability, or not what we would consider to be a sustainable brand, drops like a collection that is supposed to be focused on sustainability. And it's usually kind of like I was mentioning, it's usually a fraction of what they do overall.
Yeah.
It varies so much by brand, but like H&M, so examples of this would be like Zara has like Join Life, right? H&M has their Conscious line. Maybe like a brand like Madewell will come out with like just like a jean collection or something that's supposed to be more sustainable, right? And and these are all things that brands do, but and so it's like if you buy that product, maybe it's better environmentally than the rest of their products. Um, and that makes sense. But like we take a pretty strong stance against eco collections because at the end of the day, you're still supporting that brand, right?
Mhm.
And kind of as I mentioned, these brands are like extremely wealthy, and it's just like what we find is that like we would rather just not give our dollar, like, because you're essentially like when buying new and buying from an ethical and sustainable brand, instead you're voting with your wallet, and
Mhm.
so like right, you're voting with your wallet for companies you believe in, and these brands we don't believe in. Like even if they're taking these incremental steps, kind of like I said, at the end of the day, you're still supporting H&M, etc. And yeah, and overall, it's like a fraction of what they do. Whereas in comparison, like the brands that we're certifying, we're looking at everything they do. It's like, what does the whole brand do, not just like their side project. So yeah, so that's kind of our stance on it, which is like pretty black and white, but at the same time, it's we kind of really feel like that's what's needed, because I think what's eco collections fall into the space where it can actually be part of a greenwashing tactic, right? It can be part of a thing where brands like, because you got to think about from their perspective, they might just be thinking like, oh, if we do 10% of our clothes this way, maybe that's enough for people to trust us, and then maybe we don't have to do more than 10%. So like
Mhm.
that's the thing, is like it's not necessarily a great commitment from that brand, and it's not like a reason that I would trust a brand personally, and that's why we don't really support it.
Yeah, and like you said, reward the ones that are doing the right thing and taking the time to, pay people living wage or grow things organically, or just do it a little slower, but do it the right way, make it quality product.
Yeah.
Um, well, is there anything that we haven't touched on, that you wanted to talk about, or maybe anything that I, skipped over that you want to elaborate on?
Yeah. So some things that brands are doing really well. Yeah, obviously we're really inspired by the brands that we certify, because what we really want to do with our directory is like help people support the best brands on the planet, and so we're really inspired by like the work that they do, and they do all kinds of great things. So kind of like I mentioned, living wages, right? And part of the reason that fashion's so complicated isn't, it's also just because there aren't standards, like good standards, and that is like not necessarily anybody's fault. It's right. It's like, because certifications cost money, and so we find like a wide range of what brands are doing. And so like kind of like I mentioned, we have brands like Known Supply that so really cool things they do. So they're fair trade certified, right? So their workers are paid fairly, but then also like they do something really cool where they let you meet the person who made your clothes. So like if you buy like we had some hats made that say Eco-Stylist from them, and it's like there's a tag in the inside, and it tells you who made it, and you can either like scan the QR code, or you can like go on their website and you can like learn about that person, and you can see like where the factory is, and you can even send them like a note of thank you on their website, and that's just like a level of transparency that most brands don't have, right? Like most brands can't tell you the person that made your T-shirt or your hat. Um, so like they're doing really cool things for transparency. And then but like yeah, but for living wages, because not all brands have do it by certifications. There's other brands that really inspire us, like Adelante Shoe Company is a brand that pays living wages in Guatemala, and they were actually my inspiration for getting into this space. I learned about their brand about 4+ years ago. Didn't really know a lot about ethical and sustainable fashion before that, and I just was like really kind of blown away by what they were doing. Like I didn't know clothing brands did this. Like because they were telling me about how they pay living wages, and they were like, yeah, there was no metric that was good enough for us, and at the time, like they didn't even fair trade wasn't good enough for what they were trying to do. So they were like, we're going to measure what a true living wage in Guatemala, and we're going to pay that, and they publish these impact reports that share like what they pay, and the impact that has on their workers' lives. And it's like, yeah, so it's like stuff like that where brands are kind of doing their own thing, and really being leaders and inspiration for what the fashion industry could be. And then on the environmental side, there's I don't know, there's all kinds of cool things that brands are doing, like Thousand Fell is a sneaker brand that we recently certified, and I think their whole business model is really cool because it's designed to keep shoes out of the trash, so they design like really cool sneakers that let's say their sneakers are like $100 and you pay like a $20 deposit when you buy them, so you pay like 120, you get the sneakers, like in a year they wear out or whatever, and you send them back to be recycled, and they give you that $20 credit back, right? Because they were just holding that as a recycling to encourage you. Because if they don't, I think that it makes a lot of sense. Because if they didn't do a credit, you might be less inclined to send it back, right? Maybe it wouldn't feel worth it or something, but it kind of encourages you to send it back, and then and then you get that credit, and then you can buy another pair. And so that business model is designed to like keep the shoes out of the trash, and that's really cool. Nudie Jeans. Nudie Jeans always sets a really high bar for sustainability. We've always like really liked the work that they do, but their free repairs program is obviously a really cool initiative that they do, and where they'll like repair their jeans in store. And and it is somewhat limited to like you kind of need to be near a Nudie Jeans store to kind of take advantage of that, and obviously they're a small brand but growing. But regardless, they'll send you a free repair kit in the mail, and they also like have programs where they'll like repair their jeans and resell them. So they're really doing a lot too to keep their jeans like out of the trash, keep them in use. And the really cool thing about their free repairs too is like I visited their store, and you'll find people who like have had their jeans repaired more than once, and they always do it for free. There's not like a limit on how many times you can have your jeans repaired.
Yeah.
So you'd see people who owned jeans for like 8 years or something, and they had them repaired like 2 or 3 times in that process. And so so brands like that I think are really inspiring to us because they're really thinking about their impact, and you can tell like by the types of actions they're taking that they mean it. Like this isn't just like a program so they can sell more. It's it's a program that really considers their impact.
It's so funny that today these programs are considered like a novelty, but 50, 100 years ago, this was like the norm, right? You buy something, and if it gets a tear or breaks down, you fix it, and then you just keep using it. And today, when companies do something like this, it's like, wow, you got your jeans repaired, and it's just crazy to me how quickly I guess our society has kind of gone disposable and gone the opposite direction when we used to use things forever, and things had character and they lasted, and it wasn't a thought of like, how can we make this break down quicker so we can sell another one.
No, totally right. Yeah.
Yeah, but anyways, I digress. So those are some great examples, and we'll link to those in the show notes if anybody's interested in learning more about those companies and the great work that they're doing. And I think you've given us a lot of good examples to kind of use as a template when we're looking at other brands, or if we're trying to figure out whether to buy something. If you need it, only buy it if you need it. That's always the key, right? Don't just buy it because it's cool. I mean, I'm still tempted all the time, and I think we all struggle with that, especially growing up in a capitalist society. But I think we've got to really unlearn that and train ourselves to just slow down, like you said, and be more deliberate in what we buy, and just buy less.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess, did you have any other resources or anything else you wanted to share with our listeners, that maybe they could look into or research? If they want to do more research, they can take a look at?
Yeah, resources. I would say, I mean, what's interesting about like having a more having a more sustainable closet, it really comes down to just like starting somewhere, right? Like starting with like trying to make a more sustainable choice somewhere. It doesn't like you don't do everything. You don't need like all your clothes to be from sustainable brands, for example, if you were buying new, right? It's literally just like comes down to like one choice. It's like what it's like you're looking for something new, like in the next couple of months. Maybe you want, and you're like, okay, I'm gonna go try to thrift that, right? Or like there's some pieces that you want to buy new, so you're like, okay, let me buy from some sustainable brands instead, right? And that's and it's like literally just, maybe you don't need to buy clothes. You don't want to buy clothes right now, but maybe you want to like sign a petition or help remake with something they're doing. So like there's just so many ways to get involved, and I think that when it comes down to resources, I mean, it's like there's tons of, I think there's so many resources for thrifting right now, right? Like there's so many, whether we want to thrift online, right? There's like obviously big options like ThredUp, or you want to go to thrift stores in person. There's even like there's, if you want to get really into it, there's podcasts all about thrifting, like Pre-Loved podcast, where that's their entire focus. And then when it comes to buying new, it's like obviously for a resource, I'd recommend like our brand directory, like check that out, see if you can find good brands that you like there. When it comes to like getting rid of your old clothes, that's an interesting one. We have an article that I'll share, that's like a guide for how to kind of navigate through that decision and different resources. Because there's a lot, and it's like sometimes some of it you might not think of, right? Like it may be better to sell your clothes, for example, than to give them to Goodwill, right? Um, because in order to make it more likely that somebody uses that piece,
Mhm.
and keeping it out of the trash ultimately. So yeah, we put together a resource that tries to help people, and with that, and it's at the end of the day, like you do have to check locally, right? Because the one thing about that is like there's always going to be local resources, right? So it's kind of hard. Like when you look at the U.S. as a whole, for example, like yeah, there's going to be resources that are specific and local, but there's also some national resources that are worth considering. And Yeah, so I would say those would be some resources. And then on the advocacy side, like if people want to get involved there, I would say check out Remake for sure, and yeah, and see if you're interested in anything they're doing or want to help out.
Okay, great. And I'll add that if you're into documentaries, there's the documentary The True Cost, which I think is available on Amazon, and that kind of breaks down fast fashion and the consequences of that, and it highlights some of the stories of the people involved in the process. You mentioned Patagonia, and the founders of Patagonia have written a couple of books that were pretty interesting, and talks about their process as well, if people want to kind of see the behind the scenes of a company that's doing some of this work. So okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
As far as films, no, that's a great point. Yeah, it's interesting because the True Cost is like it's obviously several years old now, but I recently watched it and I still found it to be really relevant. Like so, yeah, it's definitely still like a great film in the space. I will say there's some other resources that are interesting that have come up. Like for short films, Remake has some short films that are really interesting. Most of them are like 10 minutes that shed light on interesting aspects of from just behind the scenes. Seeing like garment worker conditions all over the world. To like they have one on Made in America that was really fascinating because there's a whole misconception there that Made in America is like automatically ethical, and that's not true. And so their documentary really exposed that, especially when it comes to fashion. And some of those loopholes have been closed recently. Thanks to advocacy work that Remake and others have been doing, which is awesome. But basically, yeah, there were still loopholes where people weren't being paid fairly in the U.S. And so, yeah, so I would say like their short films are great. And then also, on the Patriot Act, the episode on fast fashion by Hassan Minaj was like pretty popular, and I think definitely helped build awareness for just the problems with fast fashion. Uh, so that I would recommend checking that out as well.
okay, great. Yeah, and again, we'll have the links to this in the show notes if you are listening, driving, or walking, and you can't stop to search right now. Well, I guess we'll go ahead and kind of jump into our green life hack section, and this is the part of the show where we share a product or an idea, or just a action you can take to kind of live more sustainably, and try to reduce your impact a little at a time. So Garrick, what is your green life hack for us?
Yeah, I would say my green life hack would be sure. Is it okay if I repeat what I said earlier and just like and
Yeah.
just edit that? Okay, because I
Yeah.
realized like I kind of gave that. I was like I kind of like did that the wrong moment. Okay, so my green life hack would be to when it comes to fashion would be to push back against eco perfectionism, right? So I
Mhm.
think because that's the thing we see a lot in the space where and I think honestly I think veganism or some things that happen in the vegan movement can be a great analogy for that, right? Because I think what we see sometimes is you'll see some people in the communities in the spaces who will argue that it's like all or nothing, 100%, and that's I mean on a personal level, like if that's works for you, great. But if we're talking about like mass appeal and we're talking about like you know a movement growing and everybody and more people doing it, right, making it welcoming for people, that's not realistic, right? Like it's not about 100%. It's about it's like it's like it's funny. Like vegetarians sometimes get made fun of for being like vegetarians 95% of the time, and I actually like can't disagree more strongly with that. Like you should not shame people because the thing is like you gotta think of like if you became vegetarian for environmental reasons and like 95% of the time you don't eat meat, like that's awesome. Like think about the impact of that, right? So like I think like so okay, so back to the perfectionism thing. So I'm just saying. So I think my one tip would be like yeah, forget all like don't shame people like on what I mean like don't worry about 100%, like all of, what I mean? It's like just do what you can. So I would say just like yeah, let all that go. Like just do what you can in the space, and when it comes to your closet, I would say that just comes down to considering whatever decisions you have coming up, just try to make those decisions more sustainably. So, say, so for an example journey, maybe you really want something new because you saw it on Instagram and it's like trendy, but then you look in your closet and you were like, you know what, I actually don't need anything. I can just wear what I have, right? You just you just made a free, more sustainable decision. But and maybe if you need something for an upcoming event, maybe you can thrift it, maybe you can swap it. If you're looking to buy something new, you want to invest in a high quality piece, then I would say try to buy that piece from a more sustainable and ethical brand, right? You could use our directory, for example, to find a good replacement there. But yeah, so just whatever decision is, just try to make that one decision. Don't worry about having like 100% sustainable closet overnight. I mean, that doesn't really exist anyway. So right, it's just all about steps that take you in the right direction.
No, I love that because I think we all suffer from, like you said, trying to be perfectionists and thinking that if we don't do everything 100% all the time, then we failed and we may as well give up and not try. And I think that's honestly what keeps a lot of people from trying to live more sustainably, because they feel judged, or they feel like people will judge them if they make one little misstep. And the truth is, none of us are doing it perfectly all the time. I'm still, having to buy things that are packaged sometimes, or, I'm not a vegetarian, but I do try to eat less meat. And I have to, just accept that I'm doing the best I can right now in this part of my life. And, I think I heard a phrase, it's better for 50 to 80% of the population to be low waste than for one person to be zero waste all the time. So like everybody does a little, not one person doing everything. What's going to make more of a difference? That's a great mindset to have. So thank you for that reminder.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, exactly. And if you are that 100% person, like that's awesome. But we just want to be mindful that we're welcoming people and we're not expecting that of them, right? Because I think at the end of the day, I think where people lose sight of is like we're not like and I would say is like we are not responsible for these problems as individuals, right? Like essentially, I mean, at least not to the extent like brands are responsible for, companies are responsible for the majority of, the environmental destruction and all of these impacts, and like they're the ones not paying people fairly, right? And so at the end of the day, like I think it's important to remind ourselves of that, of like as individuals, we didn't create these problems, and so when we take positive action, like when we do things we can, we're obviously kind of like empowering ourselves, right? Like we're doing what we can because we believe in something, and so like whatever that is, like those are good things we're doing, and I think we have to give ourselves more credit. Like don't be too hard on yourself. Like if you're taking action, like you're kind of leading, right? You're kind of a leader in sustainability as an individual, just for being radical, like living a more sustainable lifestyle, trying to do what you can. And so just like remind yourself of that, and like because it does matter, right? Like I think that's the other thing we see is people will think like, oh, it's I'm just one person, but like you definitely have power and impact as one person. There's a lot you can do because like our decisions, we're seeing that, right? Like our decisions, like people are the reason that brands care more. Like brands don't care more about sustainability, right? At least like sure, some brands. Let me be clear about that. Some brands started as sustainable because they really believed in it. But I mean, big brands. When we see big brands even like attempt, like fast fashion brands, for example, it's not because they cared. It's because you cared. Like people are the reason that these brands are starting to shift, and so we just got to remember that we have that power. And I'll just end that with there's a really good quote I like from Ursula de Castro, one of the co-founders of Fashion Revolution, where she said that every time a big brand hears from you, they assume that you represent 10,000 people because there was some kind of like study or something they based that on, but basically what they realize is like when a person reaches out to them and asks them like, hey, I wish you were more sustainable or whatever, or I wish you paid living wages, like whatever it is, or like they want to know more about where the clothes are made. The brands know that they tried to come up with some kind of metric, but they know that there's like basically 10,000 other people who feel that way and just didn't reach out, because most people don't. Those people aren't going to take that step. But I think it's a great reminder of like the power that we have as individuals. And so yeah, just you have that power, so don't waste it. Yeah,
that's a great reminder, folks, to use your voice and your dollars to influence these companies. Well, my green life hack isn't quite as inspirational, but it's hopefully practical and easy enough to implement if it helps you. Mine is just to unsubscribe from the promotional emails that you get from all of these companies, whether they're fashion companies or stores or credit card companies or whoever that send you these promo emails, sales or deals or whatever. Either unsubscribe or have an email just for that and only look at it when you need something specific. Because hopefully, like I've done this over the years and I find that I buy less that way. If I don't see it, if I don't go in the stores, then I'm not constantly bombarded with these messages and tempted to spend money on things I don't need and consume and things like that. So in the vein of the topic today, just consume less by hiding from temptation in that way if you can. So again, thank you so much for being on, Garik. And before we go, can you tell our listeners where they can find you and Eco-Stylist online?
Yeah, definitely. So our website is just eco-stylist.com. And you can find us there, or you can find us on Instagram. Our handle is @YourEcoStylist altogether.
Okay. And you can find me on this show, Sustainably Geeky, occasionally on Marginally Geeky, our sister show, and then on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter @Het'sGonnaBeMe. You can also find the show itself on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, also on YouTube and anywhere you listen to podcasts. So if you are not a subscriber, please do subscribe on your podcast of choice. And share us, rate us, give us 5 stars, give us a thumbs up, however you want to show us some love. We'd appreciate it. If you have ideas for future topics or guests, send them our way. And thank you so much for listening. We appreciate it and have a great rest of your day.